I wanted a place for people to receive authentic guidance and practical ways to awaken. Thought-provoking, paradigm-shifting, and empowering. This is about expanding our human consciousness to create a wave of new possibilities. I'm Dr. Theresa Bullard-Wyke, and this is Quantum Minds TV. Welcome back to Quantum Minds TV, where we take a deep dive into various perspectives on what it's going to take to create a shift in human consciousness. In this episode, we're continuing the conversation with Nassim Haramein, founder of the Resonance Science Foundation and Taurus Tech, among many other notable achievements. The universe is not only growing, it is knowing itself. It is self-aware. It is analyzing its own information, its own existence. And that brings in the essence of a spiritual intelligence. It might be very all-encompassing. We can't, humanize it or anthropomorphize it, but this universe is intelligent, and there is an awareness there. And what that, says, like, it's not a closed universe, it's an open universe. It's growing, it's expanding. Science, the old paradigm of science would say entropy ultimately rules, and that the universe is ultimately doomed to die in this sort of cold death, for example, and just everything would become so decayed, and entropy would normalize everything. But that's not what we see in the universe. We see higher and higher evolution toward more forms of order, more forms of life, more growth and intelligence, and so forth. And so our universe is like geared towards life and order and structure. And so that kind of brings us to what I think you've done, which is not only have you worked with this concept of the holographic principle and the fractal scaling, but you've also brought in the idea of geometry, sacred geometry, if I may, that structures the universe and structures the quantum vacuum. You've made that leap of quantizing SpaceTime itself. And I think we should break that down for people. I mean, my understanding to quantize, quantum means that it's discrete. It's a quanta. It's a little piece. It's either on or off. It's in or out. There's these states of existence, and then those are discrete states. And in between, there's sort of this quantum field of superpositions of many possibilities. But they call it the forbidden zone in quantum physics. And so they've quantized particles, but you've made the leap to quantize space-time. And not so space-time isn't like a continuous fabric, it's more like a woven fabric. And you have these sort of nodes and so forth of where those quanta are. But yeah, like pixels. But you've also given it a geometric structure. So can you share with us some of like how you've incorporated sacred geometry into your findings, and then what geometry have you discovered is at the key?
Right. So, from when I was, this is the reason I wanted to study independently, because I studied physics, in my van. I was in a van for 5 years by myself, and I studied physics but I was able as well, because I wasn't in a university, to study esoteric knowledge and consciousness and all this at the same time. And as I was So since I realized in physics we were missing the fundamental field, and I realized the ancient had it, I'm like, well, what did the ancient have to say about it? Because the fact that they already knew it was there was remarkable, but maybe they knew something more than just it's a field, right? Yeah. So then I realized that when they described that field, they said it had a very specific geometric component to it, that it was highly organized, very geometric and all this. And they built symbology in all of these different cultures describing the geometry of that field. And I realized that when I was taking the geometry of different cultures across the world from each other, they had similar relationship and component. It was like putting like pieces of a puzzle together, and like when you put them together, you kind of got the whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, whoa, that can't be coincidental. And so, I mean, philosophically, I was thinking, well, if we're made of that field, it's naturally that it would naturally emerge from our culture, right? If we had like enough insight into ourselves, we would eventually discover this geometric nature. And so I started to study it in detail, and I came to conclusions about its geometry, meaning it was definitely tetrahedral in nature. It was, space-time was triangulating. I mean, to me, it was no consequence that special relativity can be all written on a right angle triangle, like on a Pythagorean triangle. And so so it was geometric in nature and all this. And that I came to conclude that it had to look something like a 64 tetrahedron grid, right? The 64 tetrahedron arranged in a specific metric that produce a perfect equilibrium between the inside and the outside and all this. And that would be the fundamental pixel, if you'd like, or voxel, because it's got volume of space-time, right? But it was heuristic. I was just, it was definitely heuristic. It was extrapolated from ancient civilization and a lot of logic and studying Buckminster Fuller and all this stuff.
Uh-huh.
But then I was blown away. I was blown away in like 2000. I think it was like around 2015 or 16 with Dr. Amira Valbaker. We were calculating. So we were calculating this holographic mass solution had come up with for the radius, the proton, and where I was considering the information in the volume, which happens to be the mass of the universe, or all the other protons in the universe, and the information on the surface. And I was trying to figure out like that screening coefficient and I had found this, but I was trying to figure out, okay, so is like if I shrink that down, it had to do as well with one thing. I just want to put that little piece in, is that if you take Einstein field equations or the Schwarzschild solution for a black hole, and you take quantum vacuum fluctuation that gives you the Planck mass, the mass of one oscillation of the vacuum, which is 10 to minus 5 grams, right? It's large because it's vibrating very fast. And you plug that into Einstein's equation so that you put the mass of the Planck into the Einstein field equation, you end up with a radius for a black hole that's twice the Planck length. Okay. And so there's a factor of 2. So I was trying to figure out this factor of 2, which is at the base. There's 2's flying in the equations everywhere in physics, and it's not always clear where they come from. But anyway, so I was figuring out this factor of 2, and I realized that if I made a black hole, so it gives a black hole, right, for the Planck scale at twice the Planck length. If I took that little black hole and instead of solving it with Einstein field equations, I solved it with my holographic mass solution, I would end up with exactly 64 vacuum oscillation inside and 64 on the surface. The screening is 1, meaning all the information inside is able to communicate with the outside, and so it's perfect. It's the perfect pixel, and I was blown away because I had described the vacuum fluctuation for this equation as little spheres, right? Planck spherical units, I called them. Yeah. And if you put 64 Planck spherical units together, you get the flower of life in 3D kind of deal, and you get that metric I had come up with like 20 years earlier in my van. And and it was perfect for describing the fundamental pixel, because that one has zero entropy. Like everything, it's able to communicate across the universe instantaneously. It's all entangled, right?
Wow, amazing. Whew. So I'd like to just kind of step back a few again here, because you said some really great things again there, and we need to unpack it again. You have such a brilliant mind, but for our viewers, we want to unpack some of this. So one of the things, let's just talk about sacred geometry for a moment. So like sacred geometry in the ancient mystical traditions is said to be the language of creation and the building blocks of creation. And even when you learn about geometry in school, and you're not talking necessarily sacred geometry, but just geometry, there's certain fundamental geometries that are the foundation that everything else in our three-dimensional world is built upon. And they talk about something called the 5 Platonic solids, that those are the main geometries. Every single one of those Platonic solids can fit perfectly within a sphere. Every one of them, there's 5 of them, right? But each one, they have the same, on all their edges, the lengths are the same, the angles between those corners are the same, and they are the same face on every side, right? So there's certain rules that make it a Platonic solid. And then so there's 5 of them, one of which you mentioned. The first one is the tetrahedron, which is like 3 perfect triangles, 4 actually, 3 sides and then the base, all perfect triangles and equilateral and so forth. And then, and these 5 Platonic solids actually relate to the 5 elements from a mystical perspective. And then you can combine these, or you can truncate them and combine them. And these are the things that build up much of our three-dimensional world. But if we take a step back even more to 2 dimensions, because the faces of these Platonic solids are each 2-dimensional, they're either a triangle, a square, you do have a pentagon on one of them. And then, of course, they all fit perfectly within a sphere, which is a circle, 2-dimensionally. So you have the square, the circle, the triangle, and then the pentagon is kind of a combination of triangles and square. And right. These 3, in a 2-dimensional sense, the circle, the square, and the triangle are like the 3, we call them in the mystery school tradition, the 3 keys to heaven, because these are the 3 most fundamental geometries that our entire universe is built on. And the triangle in particular, which you mentioned, because these points of space are triangulating, the triangle represents spirit. It represents the original. And in the Kabbalistic system, they show that the top of the tree of life is a triangle. There's the 3 in 1. And we see this in, this Trinity, this 3 in 1 divine sort of Godhead figure in all the ancient mystical traditions around the world and throughout time. This Trinity is super important. So I love how it's almost like the signature of the divine. The divine mind is encoded within the very fabric of space-time. Exactly. And then you multiply that out fractally and holographically, and you get this, not just a 3-dimensional, but, multi-dimensional structure of your 64 tetrahedron grid. And I remember going in, I think it was 2011, I attended one of your delegate programs, and I saw you, and how you kind of came to this structure, and then how you later also discovered that the tree of life, sort of a 3-dimensional version of the tree of life, fractally kind of like a snowflake out, was also a part of this structure. So it really is like you've discovered this mother of all sacred geometries that all of the others come from.
And now, let's enjoy this short consciousness break featuring the amazing research of Nassim Haramein and the Resonance Science Foundation.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like from the tetrahedron or from the triangle, you can extrapolate all the others, so it's the fundamental seed. And when you do, and that's a really important point, when you do, you get movement. You get the movement, and you get a very important ratio that develops between the tetrahedron, the octahedron, the cuboctahedron, and eventually, the icosahedron, the dodecahedron. You get the phi ratio that emerge. You get movement. You get spirals emerging from this. You get angular momentum,
Which is the spin. The torsion,
you get
right?
spin.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Which is how creation actually manifests itself. So I'm going to tell you another secret. That's coming out in that paper is that so in this paper we scale from Planck scale, even sub-Planckian. We figured out the speed of the sub-Planck and everything to universal size, and we get the right answer, all the correct masses and everything. We even get the right temperatures. So, for instance, we take the equation for the temperature at the Planck scale, and as we apply our scaling, we end up at the temperature of the CMB, or the background temperature for the universe that we measure, which is remarkable.
Yeah, so cosmic microwave background radiation from Big Bang.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing.
Amazing.
But when you do that, you can basically do the Einstein triangle for that scaling. Like what is the universe scaling with, right? You're doing so the Einstein triangle, for people that are not familiar, is the basis of special relativity, if you'd like, is that the momenta and the kinetic energy or the potential energy are connected through the hypotenuse of the triangle, right? Which is the kinetic and potential energy, the kinetic plus the potential energy gives the total energy of the system.
And does that come to a Pythagorean triangle?
Yeah.
So interesting that it connects all the way back to Pythagoras.
Exactly. Pythagoras had it.
Yeah.
There's a whole history there. Maybe if we wouldn't have burnt the schools of Pythagoras, maybe the universe would have, maybe we would have evolved faster. But let's just say, so we did these calculations, and the total energy of the way the universe is scaling and transforming, basically. And so we use special relativity, right? Because we know it's very exact and appropriate. So when we did that, we found that the relationship between the kinetic energy and the potential energy happens in the scaling of the universe happens to be a perfect phi ratio. And we didn't put it in. Amazing. There was nowhere in our equations where phi ratio was apparent that it was going to come out in any way, shape, or form, right? It wasn't from a geometric consideration. It wasn't any of that. It was just straight, energy calculation. And I didn't think it was real. So I harassed poor Olivier for like a week, trying to break it. And it's like, no, it can't be.
That's a very typical physicist thing to do. It's, when it comes out too perfect and too elegant in the solution, it's like, oh, I want to believe it, but I can't allow myself to right now. So I got to see if I can tear this apart first and get it out again.
Make sure I didn't screw up, make sure it's not circular some way, and so I was like, but it's not. And it basically, it shows you that like the parameter between kinetic energy and potential energy in the universe, where matter would be created, right? That relationship about what's in the potential and what actually express itself kinetically in the universe is actually that phi ratio relationship, which is all over the ancient civilization, esoteric knowledge, and with the geometry. And so it's really kind of like, comes together. And it's, never mind that you find the phi ratio everywhere in nature, that you find it on your body, the relationship between the end of your finger and the next part of your finger is a phi ratio, and then another one with the other side, and then your hand to your finger, then your hand to your forearm, and everything. And when we find something beautiful, is because it's very close to the phi ratio. Like beautiful women like you, have high phi ratio relationship in their face, and yeah. And so it's very, so we actually recognize it as beauty.
Yeah.
In our consciousness.
Because it's harmony, right? It's the same. This is why I mentioned Pythagoras earlier, is that, the Pythagoreans taught that sacred geometry followed the same principles and the same ratios that harmony, harmonics and music follow. So they said that sacred geometry was like frozen music, and that which is pleasing to the ears, that we hear as harmonious and beautiful, is also pleasing to the eyes, that we see it as beautiful and aesthetic. And this phi ratio, the golden mean, comes from the Fibonacci sequence, but we see it all over nature, from the cosmos, and the structure of galaxies, like those spiral galaxies, to the shape of a shell or the flowers, like on a sunflower, to our own bodies. And this is why the ancients, as you mentioned before, the ancients said, if you want to know the secrets of the universe, then you must know thyself, because we are like the measures of the universe are all within us as well. So the more we come to know ourselves, the more we come to know the universe. We are the reflection of the whole, and yet we're also our own universe within us. We're a macrocosm and a microcosm, and our connection to the universe comes in so many ways. And I love how you said that before, like a while back. You said that if these ratios and this structure and this energy was already there within the fabric of space-time itself, within the fabric of the quantum field, and we just needed to rediscover it. And we've rediscovered it in multiple ways throughout time. We've rediscovered it through the mystics and their visions that they've had, and the wisdom teachings that have been handed down since ancient times. And we're rediscovering it again in multiple ways through science and mathematics and geometries and all of these things. And yet they all ultimately come together. And I absolutely love how elegant and yet, just perfectly synergistic it is that your equations brought out phi, which governs so much in our universe.
Yeah.
It's like the heartbeat of the rhythm, the essence of the universe itself. And that's a
right. I had to sit with it for like a while, thinking, wow, like, of course, if these equations are right, they would come up with that. But It was just, wow, I thought it would come up in some really complex way, with like very complex mechanics, or that it might come out that way, but to come out so clean, so beautiful, it was just I had to sit with it, and basically, it brings you back. How you were saying earlier, that was really good. I didn't know this, but like that, when the alchemist would get like the light or the reaction, it would have an impact on their consciousness as well, and it was impacting them back, right? So it's like a forward feedback thing. It's the same with me when I come up when these equations solve and this becomes clear and alpha comes out and phi comes out and all this stuff comes out. It's like every time I feel like, oh, I get a deeper sense of my relationship to the universe, to who I am, what the universe is, and how I interact with it. Like there's something fundamental that changes inside of you when you realize these principles. And I think that's why these ancient knowledge set and philosophy were really impactful on people. You know, they would transform themselves by understanding these principles. And I believe that when we develop the technology that goes along with that, it's gonna transform our whole society with it as well. You know, like it has a transformative effect on people. For instance, to see a technology that would extract energy from the vacuum, and you know that it does that. You know, I've seen people being transformed. You know. And in some case, not necessarily well, meaning like transformation can be tough.
Shocking.
You know,
sometimes.
It can be shocking. It can have, you know, it can throw you sideways. It can have, you know.
Unravel belief systems, entire paradigms get shattered when we have.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Wow.
And certainly, you know, a device that extracts energy with no energy source is sometimes something that twists, you know, like changes something in the mind that like, oh, you know, we're not limited to a finite reserve of energy on our planet. You know, like it transforms, it like opens to like, wow, you know, all of a sudden, you know, space travel, you know, like all of a sudden, like, being part of something larger, of not being an isolated system, you know, being part of an amazing network or an amazing willworks of nature, you know.
I love how you've shared that, because I've experienced that both as a scientist and as a mystic. You know, I've experienced both sides of these mind-expanding epiphanies. You know, as a scientist, for example, back in university, when I came across for the first time Euler's identity, which is showing that there is a direct link between all these other constants like phi, the golden ratio, E, you know, the natural logarithm, I, the imaginary, and you saw that they all came together. You thought they were separate, but then there's this identity that says, no, they're all linked as one thing. I thought, that was like so mind-blowing to me as a scientist. And also, you know, knowing that our universe is so finely tuned for life, and that, you know, if you just changed any of those fundamental constants just a little bit, like we would not have planets and stars and life as we know it. So our universe is so finely tuned for life that it's just incredible. And to me, it's just so elegant. It just speaks volumes that there is an intention, that there is an intelligence behind this universe. And I know that, you know, some of the materialist scientists today wanted to say, well, you know, the many worlds hypothesis of quantum physics, and there's multiverses, and in the multiverse, there's infinite possible universes. Every one of them has a different, you know, arrangement. Therefore, ours is nothing special. But but, you know, in mystical Kabbalah, we also work with multiverses, and yet you still have a spiritual intelligence and a purpose behind it all. And, you know, I think it's just there's two types of people, you know, those who choose to see the beauty and the meaning and the elegance and the purpose behind things, and those who just, you know, are kind of cynical and nihilistic and say, no, there's no purpose to it. Maybe it's beautiful, but there's no purpose to it. And it's like, no, purpose is the key that makes, you know, it exciting and magical and meaningful. And, you know, the many world theory
to deal with the fine-tuning problem, which is, you were describing, right? The fact that the universe is perfectly tuned for life.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of funny because it's probably the biggest cop-out in physics ever. to say that, well, in an infinite amount of universes, there's at least one possibility that one of them would be exactly tuned.
Right. So it's not special. Nothing special.
And we happen to be in it, right? And it's like, okay, if you want to, I thought we were doing physics, but if you want to do philosophy that way, fine. But I'm just saying, if you're doing physics, right, you'd find that there is actually very specific relationship in ratios that are so because they all relate to each other. That's the thing. You see, this is where it's really, really important to make the distinction. The problem with the other view, which is not the multi-world theory, but the other view, which is like this purpose, that sounds religious. Religious, right? So that repels the physicists, right? Because they go, and so, but the intelligent universe doesn't have to be from a godlike, entity that's ruling on all things and making it that way, or another view currently, held by others that like it's just a computer program that somebody wrote.
Simulation.
Right? Yeah, it's simulation. Actually, you can actually have the whole field feeds the individual and the individual field feed the whole in a perpetually, feeding itself system that is growing and learning about itself, just like just like you're self-perpetuating and learning. Well, the universe can be this, so that because nothing is isolated, all information in the universe is able to feed to any other place. So the system is highly tuned because it's all learning from itself, and it continuously increase organization and structure and coherency and energy level, so that it continuously tuned to the highest level of evolution it can tune to. And in that case, you don't need a God. Everything is God, right? Everything is participating, and everything is, and you're part of this thing. You're participating. Your participation is critical to the whole thing.
Yeah,
right?
That's the quantum physics, that we live in a participatory universe, that our observation of the universe help, and in mystical sense, they also say that the universe created us so that it can know itself. That, through our reflection, through our observation, through our ability to come to know it and to know ourselves, the universe is also knowing itself. And, when you come back to this quantum entanglement of everything, and at the quantum level of everything becomes one, it's unified. There is no God versus us. It's all one, right? So we are that universe that is coming to know itself. And yet I believe that essence of awareness and some level of what we might call spiritual intelligence is actually primary. This is a Hermetic teaching, that the universe is mental, that everything starts as a thought in this one great mind and then manifests from that, versus what science today is saying, well, consciousness is emergent, that there's information, but it's not purposeful information, it's just information, and matter, time, space, energy, and consciousness are all emergent properties from that information. But I feel that now there's some intention from this universal mind, and that's the that's the essence of the difference right there. Was there
right. Because they assume a random fluctuation of the vacuum structure, and there's regions that are random, there's regions that are highly organized, and we call them atoms. And so the information is moving through this atom structure and through that network. So the idea that it's all random and that consciousness or even biology is a fluke of self-organizing system is not only mathematically completely unfounded, meaning mathematically it doesn't add up. Like since the so-called Big Bang, the beginning of the universe, which that can be debated too, there's not enough time to even make one microbe. Never mind a microbe, make one cell, one single cell, right? The complexity of like the way the amino acids and all this stuff come together and make one cell that function, right? In 13.7 billion years, no go. The calculation we did in our paper, space memory network on it's the only paper I wrote in biophysics. Well, actually, I wrote two, but anyway. So it's in there. We calculate, the probability, and we're like at trillions and trillions of years past the Big Bang to have enough time for the universe to like come up with all the random calculations, the random interaction it would have to go through to somehow make a cell. And then like, if there was just like a volcano eruption at that same moment, or just a little stone would just fall on the cell and kill it, then it would take another trillion, billions and billions. And so it's like, it's just not possible. So like, viewed from that perspective, the tuning problem in physics cannot be because there's infinite amount of universe. It's just, it has to be because there's high coherent information flow, and we're the product of it. We're the evidence of it. Like, it's insane. Like 100 trillion cells that are like functioning absolutely perfectly, every second, like trillions of chemical change in your body are happening so that you can stay coherent right here and actually absorb information and compute it and like transform it and feed it back to the universe, and then the universe can feed you back your experience, and so it all of a sudden you start to feel the godlike nature of creation, not a God that's somewhere else, but like the incredible power and beauty of creation that you're like the epicenter of. Like you're the greatest jewel of accomplishment, right? Maybe, but don't forget everybody else as well.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
We're like a big cosmic web, and at every point of the web coming into junctions, there's this multifaceted, beautiful jewel of creation, and we're all on that big web, and we're all those jewels, and that totality of all of that is, the oneness. So join us again as we continue to dive deeper into this fascinating conversation with Nassim Haramein on the next episode of Quantum Minds TV.
This conscious conversation was created, produced, and recorded by Dr. Theresa Bullard in collaboration with Nassim Haramein, and edited by Verse Content and HH Films and Photo. The theme music and intro videography were created by Tim Mountain of Even Load Productions. Quantum Minds TV is a product of the Quantum Learning Academy.